In this lesson, we'll do our final render using the built-in Iray renderer within Painter. Now before jumping into Iray mode, I'll just disable our post effects and lower the camera aperture back to 0. To enable the render mode, in the toolbar, you can hit the camera icon. This will bring us into Iray mode. So Iray is the real-time path tracer renderer, and the viewport works as usual, so I can rotate my camera as usual and adjust the environment map. This time we'll do a full body shot, so I'll try to rotate my camera to fit the model in view as best as I can. Now you'll notice every time I do a camera or light change, the image gets pixelated and slowly refines. Let's have a look at the Iray settings to see what's going on. You'll see the status, the resolution, the iterations, and the rendering time. Now, keeping an eye on this area, every time I rotate the camera and stop, the status says rendering, and the iterations begin to count upwards. Now, just understand that the more iterations, the more refined and less pixelated the image will be. So how do we keep getting this image to refine more over time? Well, the most important factor in Iray is the max time slider. What this tells the renderer to do is to keep refining and adding iterations for this amount of time. So at 10 seconds, we have 21 iterations. Now let's lower the max time to 1 and rotate the viewport. You'll see it just refined for 1 second, which gave us 5 iterations, and the result is still quite a pixelated image. Now let's change the time to 5 seconds, and you'll notice that Iray will continue to refine the image up to 5 seconds. As another example, I'll just change the time to 15 seconds. So the cool thing is, Iray will continue where it left off and refine the image, rather than starting a whole new render. So how the max time slider works with the max samples is, Iray will continue to render until either one of these is met first. So let's just change the max sample amount to 100 and the max time to 60 seconds. You'll notice that Iray will stop when it hit the max sample amount before reaching the set amount of time. This is handy if you're happy with a set amount of samples, rather than setting an extremely long render time. Next is the resolution. You'll notice that here we're set at an odd resolution, about 900 by 600. So this corresponds to the viewport window size. So if I adjust the size, the resolution will change. So for a portfolio image, I may want a higher render, so I can use the override viewport resolution. By default, this is set to 1920 by 1200. Note that the higher resolution, the longer it'll take to refine the image. At any point during the rendering process, you can hit the pause button, and if you're happy with the result, you can simply hit Save Render and save the image to your desktop. Or you can even use the Share button, which will upload directly to your ArtStation account. And when you're ready to continue, you can just hit the pause button again. Moving forward, I'm just going to disable the override viewport resolution and change the max time back to 10 seconds for now. So in the viewer settings, we have some of the same controls as before, the environment map, the exposure, and the environment rotation. But this time we have something called dome. This environment map is being projected currently onto a sphere with a ground plane. You can change this type to either an infinite sphere or just a sphere. I'll just change this back to the sphere with ground. You can always change the radius and texture scale to match the proportions of your asset. If you're looking for more of a clean render without any backdrop, we can choose clear color and just choose a color that will suit the render. Now the ground option is essentially a shadow catcher, so if I disable this, you can immediately see there's nothing grounding the asset. You can always adjust the height of the ground plane if your asset was exported a bit off center. And I'll just move this back to its original spot. We can also add some reflectivity to the ground, so I can choose a white color here, and the amount of reflection is in the glossiness slider. So the glossier it is, like a value of 1, the more reflective, which is more of a mirror projection. I'll bring this back down to around 0.4. And lastly is the shadow intensity, which actually controls the intensity of the shadow hitting the ground. If we scroll down a little bit, we have the MDL parameters. This will allow us to adjust the emissive. So I'll just zoom into the side light here. And the cool thing this time is when I up the value of the emissive, it's actually physically emitting some light. Now, in the previous lesson, we used the post effects to do our depth of field. Now, this time in Iray, we can take advantage of the physical depth of field, which will be a lot more realistic looking. So like before, we can up the aperture, and you'll notice that things are going to get really grainy here. We can hold Control and middle click to set our focus. Now, the blurred areas are very pixelated at the moment. That's because we're moving at a very low refined image. If you're doing any effects like this, you do want to up the max time and sample amounts for your final shot. So now that we have our focus, I'm just going to lower the aperture a little bit. So now we can reactivate our post effects, and just make sure that we turn off the depth of field setting now that we're using the physical depth of field instead of the post effect version. You can fine tune any post effects as necessary for your final shot now. And for this one, I'm just going to max out the sample amount and then do a 10-minute render, and I'll choose Override Viewport Resolution button. And that brings us to the end of this module and course. So we've covered a lot of the basics of Substance Painter. I encourage you to explore a lot of the other brushes and presets that you can play around with, and looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with. Happy texturing! At the end of this module, you should understand that keeping your layer stack organized will allow you to work in a very organic way, allowing you to even make wholesale changes late into a project. When you're happy with your textures and ready to import into an external program, take advantage of the export presets that come shipped with Painter. And if you're doing something more custom, explore the configuration tab. Now, you don't always have to use an external renderer for shots of your assets. Using the Painter viewport alongside with the post effects can give you some great results. To push your renders even further, make use of Iray and the Override Viewport button to come up with higher quality images for posting up on your portfolio or ArtStation account.